An SOS signal sent from the past, mysterious tapes and bones uncovered that only leads to more questions than answers. Spanning almost 4 decades, internet sleuths and mystery connoisseurs like you and me often wondered about what exactly happened on that fateful day. We are talking about a hike gone seriously wrong on one of Japan's most popular hiking trails. Hello everyone, my name is Vander and this is Vander Explains. Today's story is one that is quite mysterious, with more than one twist in its tale. Many still wonder what exactly happened on that fateful afternoon on July 24th, 1989. Or maybe an eerie incident that happened years ago that just adds another layer of intrigue. If you're into strange cases, mysteries, or in fact any topic that needs some light to be shed on them, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you'll never miss out on our deep dives into the unknown. So without further ado, let's get started. Our story takes us to the island of Hokkaido, the largest and northernmost prefecture in Japan. On this island lies the Daisetsuzan National Park, which is nicknamed the Playground of the Gods due to its towering mountain ranges and incredible natural scenery. Within this national park is Mount Asahi, or Asahidake, the tallest mountain on the island of Hokkaido. The trip to the summit of Asahidake is quite popular, and many locals and tourists alike often take this 2 to 3 hour ascent to witness breathtaking views. The road to the summit is pretty straightforward. As you can see, the trail is almost exactly like a straight line. The whole trip will cover approximately 2.6 kilometers, reaching an elevation of 2,266 meters at the top. But don't be fooled, this trek could easily turn from a pleasant walk to a nightmare in an instant. As hikers begin to reach the summit, the tree line starts to disappear, and if weather gets bad, fog could quickly consume the area. The only saving grace is for hikers to look for a landmark called Safe Rock, a cube-shaped rock that the locals use to indicate that they are on the right track. However, there is a small problem with this. You see, in the general vicinity of Safe Rock is another cube-shaped boulder called False Safe Rock. If hikers follow the trail of False Safe Rock, it will gradually lead them down to a thick, broadleaf bamboo valley instead of ascending to the summit. This is exactly what happened to 2 hikers from Tokyo who embarked on a mountaineering trip at Asahidake. Family members of these 2 men had alerted the local police about their disappearance for several days. It wasn't until the afternoon of July 24th, 1989, when police began searching for the lost hikers. At this point in time, it was assumed that the hikers were already lost for a couple of days. As the rescue helicopters began to circle around the perimeter, they spotted something strange on the hillside. The pilots had spotted a clearing with some markings engraved on the ground. Upon closer inspection, they noticed that it was actually the letters S.O.S made with what seemed like cut-down tree trunks. The pilots circled around the sign to see if the missing hikers were around the vicinity, but after some time, they still have not located them. Nonetheless, seeing the sign was enough for the pilots to alert the rest of the search party to the area. Other helicopters and rescuers on the ground began to close in around the marked clearing. After a few more hours, they finally found the 2 men roughly 2 kilometers north of the SOS sign. They looked dehydrated, exhausted, and very malnourished, so they airlifted the hikers and rushed to the hospital. The news broke, and the relief was felt among the rescuers and the local community. After the 2 hikers were stable enough to have a conversation, both the local police and helicopter pilots decided to go to the hospital and pay them a visit. They wanted to share the amazing story of the rescue and commend them for their ingenious idea in creating the S.O.S Signal. As they began to chat, everything went well. Smiles, laughter, and relief all around. But when the pilots praised the men about their life-saving SOS signal, their smiles and laughter quickly disappeared and confusion starts to set in. Their rescuers stated that had it not been for their SOS signal, they probably would never have spotted the hikers. In complete bewilderment, the hikers began to look at each other and look back at their rescuers before asking the question, "What SOS signal? We never made an SOS signal." In shock, the pilots and police officer then reluctantly explained, "The SOS signal made from chopped down birch trees laid on the ground." They questioned the hikers several more times to make sure that they were not messing around or if they might have lost their memories during the incident. But the two men remained firm, stating that they had no idea about any sort of SOS signal. The room just went eerily quiet, and it finally sunk in. This means that there is still someone missing on Asahidake. The next morning, on the 25th of July 1989, another search party was launched to scour the area for any missing survivors. Search and rescue personnel were deployed on foot and in the air around the perimeter of the SOS signal. After hours of searching, there were still no signs of anyone else. They did, however, discover a lot of mysterious objects around the sign. The first thing that was discovered were some human remains scattered around the site. The bones looked cleaned of flesh, which indicates that the remains were there for quite some time. There were visible gnaw marks on the bones, likely due to wild animals in the area like foxes or bears. These remains were quickly bagged and tagged and sent to Asahikawa Medical University for examination. Meanwhile, over in Police HQ, they were also doing their own research into the sign itself. If neither of the two Tokyo men had any idea of the SOS sign, then it had to be reconstructed days, weeks, if not months prior. Japanese authorities thought of a brilliant plan to search for aerial photographs of Asahidake. At the time, the Japanese Forestry Services took pictures of the national park every 5 years or so. They went digging into their records and finally found an image of what the approximate area looked like in 1987. To their surprise, what looked like a silhouetted reflection of the letters SOS can be seen. Going further back in 1982, the sign was not there. Everyone was stunned, but they soon realized that the person or people responsible for making the sign have been missing for at least 2 years. Back at the scene, investigators made another shocking discovery. Not far from where the remains were found, a hole fit for a relatively small person was discovered under the roots of an old birch tree. This site was approximately 50 meters north of where the remains were found. When investigators unearthed the objects in the hole, among other things, they found a backpack with 3 cassette tapes, a driver's license or ID, and a Sony tape recorder. Before we uncover who the ID belongs to, I would like to point out that there was an even stranger object found in the hole. It was a human skull. Now this is quite odd, as none of the reports that I could find clarifies whether the skull belonged to the same remains found 50 meters south of the hole. At this stage, we could only assume that it is of the same person. Maybe a wild animal dragged it all the way and it wound up in the hole. This fact may play a part later on, so keep in mind that we are yet to know who this skull belongs to. Now back to ID in the dough. When investigators dusted off the ID, they found that it belonged to Kenji Iwamura. Kenji is a 25-year-old man who lived in the city of Konan in the Aichi prefecture. To put things into perspective, he was about a 2-hour flight away from home, or roughly a 23-hour drive. Searching through reports and archives, Kenji Iwamura was in fact reported missing on July 10, 1984, after deciding to set up on a hiking trip at Asahidake. He was only reported missing due to his employer noticing his disappearance from work as well as his landlord missing rent. A search was done to locate Kenji, but after a few weeks with no result, search and rescue stopped and declared Kenji a missing person. Back in the present, almost eerily 5 years exactly, the mysterious disappearance of Kenji seemed like it was coming to an end. Or will it? Thinking that the case can be wrapped up, investigators then get a call from Asahikawa Medical University. The coroner reported the remains found was that of a woman around the age of 20 to 40 with a blood type O. Whoever it was had suffered some ante-mortem fracturing on their left thigh and right shoulder. The coroner also corroborated that animal bite marks were indeed visible. Now this really puzzled everyone. Remember the skull found in the hole? Could this have belonged to the other person that also went missing at Asahidake? The two findings seem to contradict each other. A backpack presumably with items belonging to Kenji, and the remains that of a woman. The mystery deepens. On July 27th, 2 days after collecting and excavating all the evidence at Asahidake, investigators decided to play the recordings on the 3 cassette tapes. When the first cassette tape was played, the opening into the anime Macross can be heard. The second tape was similar. The song of another anime, Magical Princess Minky Momo, played along. Now the third and final tape was a lot more distressing. For those of you who might be squeamish, you have been warned. You can clearly hear a man's distressed voice sounding out, syllable by syllable, pleading for help. Though I could not find the full audio recording, the message roughly translates to, SOS, help me. I can't move on the cliff. SOS, help me. The place is where I first met the helicopter. The Sasa is deep and I can't go up. Lift me up from here. It seemed like at the time of the recording, Kenji was facing a cliffside and was obstructed by the thick bamboo forest. He probably made the recording as he had spotted some of the search and rescue helicopters flying along the perimeter. Since Kenji can be heard screaming SOS, it is highly likely that he was the one who made the sign. This is actually a solid plan. Not only that Kenji had the ingenuity to craft the sign out of birch trees, but he could just play the SOS tape recorder in a loop, conserving his own energy in the process. However, it is very strange that the scene depicted from Kenji's SOS recording indicates that he was on a cliffside. The tape, on the other hand, was found further down in the valley of the mountain. The authorities then analyzed the tape and began looking for Kenji's next of kin for identification. They finally located Kenji's parents and informed him of the horrible news. As detectives delivered the news and consoled the family, they still had to ask them to ID their son's voice. To everyone's surprise, Kenji's parents weren't even 100% sure that the voice in the recording belongs to their missing son. But the context of Kenji's disappearance and the contents of the tape was enough to sway them and the police that it was indeed Kenji. Authorities blamed the bad audio quality, which led to Kenji's parents not recognizing their son's voice. After collecting all of the evidence, the authorities decided that they wanted to wrap the case up, completely ignoring the fact that the SOS signal itself needed more analysis. It seems like none of them were even questioning how feasible it was to chop down 19 birch trees and carry it out into the opening to form the SOS signal. Bear in mind that the clearing where the signal was found is roughly 100 meters away from where the other birch trees are. When measured, each letter was about 5 meters tall and 3 meters wide. To top it all off, no woodcutting equipment was found at all around the site. Even when ignoring all the subtle details, authorities still had to answer the misgendering of the human remains. They contacted the Asahidake Medical University and spoke to the coroner once again. Surprisingly, the coroner and the university retracted their previous statement and issued a correction, stating that the body was actually of a male with the blood type A. This to me is quite strange, as you would expect a legitimate source would get it right the first time. Now, doing a little digging on the Bureau of Statistics, you can clearly see a huge decline in solved cases from 1988 to 1989. The numbers went from a 59% to a 46% clearance rate. It seemed like law enforcement or the government was trying to prop the rates back up, so they tried to close as many cases as possible, this being one of them. The evidence was there, the body was found, so in the end, they ruled this case a horrible accident and closed the books. However, like many of you out there, I do have my own doubts and speculations about this case. There were a lot of inconsistencies, to say the least. Let's start from the beginning and pick apart the narrative that the Japanese police were trying to sell to the public. The first thing that stood out to me was the sign itself. It is definitely possible that one person could construct this sign themselves, but if you put things into perspective, it may not add up. A total of 19 birch logs were used to make this sign. The estimated average weight for birch logs of the same size is roughly 80 kilograms. Whoever person or persons that made this must strategically cut 19 logs, each weighing 80 kilograms, and drag it along the mountainside 100 meters back and forth. There was also no visible wood-cutting equipment like an axe or hatchet found around the area, nor was it reported in Kenji's backpack or belongings. The logs were found with a clean and precise cut, so a tool of some sort had to have been used. It is certainly possible, but it seems like a gargantuan task for one person. Another inconsistency was the ante-mortem injuries found on the remains. There were fractures on the thigh and shoulder suffered by Kenji. That would have made it near impossible for him to chop, carry, and align the sign himself. Not to mention that he must be severely fatigued and dehydrated prior to even making the sign. Some of you might argue that the equipment could have been picked up by other hikers across the 5-year time frame, or it could have been simply misplaced or lost. Some can also argue that the injuries might have been suffered by Kenji after constructing the sign. Others can also say that the birch logs could have also been ones that were already laying on the ground, or those that have naturally fallen. To those I'd say, what are the chances of finding 19 almost identically sized logs around the area? Whatever it may be, it still sounds like a near impossible task to do alone, especially not when you're panicked, fatigued, dehydrated, and lost. Now on to the remains. The initial report being that of a woman with blood type O, and then changing it after the investigation was coming to an end, was really strange. Reports mentioned that the coroner initially deduced that the remains were quite small for that of a male, and the structure was more akin to a female body. So who did those remains belong to? Why was the skull found inside of the hole instead of outside where the rest of the remains were? No reports at the time, or at least none that I could scour, explained why this might be. The final inconsistency was the tape recording. During the investigation, Kenji's parents were shown all of the items found on Asahidake. They both agreed and verified that the backpack was indeed Kenji's. But when played the audio, Kenji's parents did not recognize the man on the tape. They reckoned that it could have been Kenji, but weren't exactly sure. This could be blamed by the bad audio quality like mentioned before. But wait, during the 1989s, this form of audio was pretty common, and especially in Japan, who was considered one of the leaders in audio technology. At the time, this was one of the best quality audios that people could have gotten. Another inconsistency was how the recording did not have any sounds of wind, wildlife, or any background noises present. If someone were to make a tape recording out in the wild, it is safe to assume that something else could have been heard, or maybe just a general echo, but none were present in this recording. Putting speculations and theories aside, this was indeed a horrible incident. A young man's life was tragically taken on what should have been a leisurely hike. But because of the work that Kenji did either with or without another person, it did save the lives of 2 other hikers. Sort of an ironic occurrence, an SOS sign made to rescue him didn't work, but it did work for a couple of strangers 5 years into the future. So although it had a bitter start, it ended up being a miraculous ending. Well, that is all for today. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and possibly consider subscribing to the channel. Let me know down in the comments what you really think happened and if the speculations and theories might have some meaning behind them. Either way, it's good to have a discussion on matters such as this to bring new perspectives. For now, this is Vander, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next one.